Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking with Ryan Anderson, who's the VP of Global Research and Insights for our client MillerKnoll. So thank you so much for sparing the time to speak with me today, Ryan.
It's a pleasure. You're a trusted partner. Of course, I'd spend the time with you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. That's excellent. So, would you like to start us off by telling us a little bit about MillerKnoll and also what your role is in the company?
Sure. MillerKnoll's a collective of companies. We just actually created that name MillerKnoll when Herman Miller and Knoll came together just a year and a half ago. So we're a group of design-focused brands. We make furniture, textiles, a whole host of other things to help create great physical spaces. That includes workspace, home, hospitals, schools. And I have the privilege of leading the global research and insights team. So that's the team doing research all over the world about how these spaces can positively affect us. And then I've got a group of folks who share that with people, could be architects, interior designers, real estate leaders, or even consumers thinking about their homes. So we have a group of people who share insights with them across the world to help them create better spaces.
That's amazing. And I love the fact that you use that phrase, creating positive spaces, because that kind of positivity really comes across from the episodes I've listened to. So the podcast we're currently producing for you is called Looking Forward. Would you like to share a bit about the background to that and what you were hoping to achieve from the podcast when you set it up?
Well, we started looking forward right in the midst of the pandemic. In late 2020, we noticed that organizations, particularly big companies, were forming these committees of executives to try to address their return to office. Many people thought it was going to be like a policy that they enacted, and then 3 weeks later, everybody would be in the office. But we'd already seen enough to know that that might not be realistic. So the idea in its earliest stages was, let's get to those committees with great content, and then let's help the people that we serve in corporate real estate and facilities roles, provide them with really good information. And then the name Looking Forward again was really around maybe less of a focus on return and more what's it going to take to get from what was going on in quarantine to what a more sustainable approach to flexible and distributed working might look like. So I do think we managed to tap into those committees that were formed for a while. And hopefully, as audience members, those folks have just stuck with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure.
We have research on the future of work dating back to right around 1960. We've been studying it for a long time. We've always felt that a better understanding of how people work can create better workplaces, and that can be a real strategic asset for organizations. But we were frustrated for a lot of years that senior level executives at companies and nonprofits and other organizations didn't always think about their physical workspaces as an asset or a tool to help them achieve more. And so the pandemic and the focus on remote work right there in 2020, 2021 created a unique opportunity for us to engage people that were suddenly interested in the workplace, in particular senior level leaders. So we kind of conceptualized Looking Forward as a chance to talk about work and talk about workplace with groups of executive leaders who were really paying attention to it for the first time. And we chose the name partly because we think that maybe there's a little bit too much emphasis on returning to the past, thinking about the way we used to work in the past. In fact, we are pretty optimistic about where both work and the workplace can go. So we figured if we really presented the best information that we had from our research on how work is changing and how workplaces can be positive elements in organizations' work experience, that we could take a more future-leaning approach.
Yeah, that's amazing. And to think you've got that data right way back to the 1960s is, quite fascinating. I'd love to have a glimpse of how that's evolved over that time. So, does the podcast fit well into a kind of overarching strategy you have for content?
It does. We have an unusual approach to our research in that I do have a wonderful research team, and we conduct mostly primary and secondary research, qualitative and quantitative, around the world. But we're highly networked. So we have lots of smart friends that we conduct research with, and we go out and we do work with Boston Consulting Group, with Slack, with social scientists, technologists. And in fact, the reason I mentioned going back to the 60s, when Stanford showed the world the first personal computer, one of our companies, Herman Miller, designed the environment for it in 1968. So that began our tech research. We've always had these wonderful partners. A podcast was a really great medium to say, yeah, we want to share what we've learned, but let's bring our friends into the conversation quite literally. And so it worked out. I do think it was interesting starting a podcast at a time when people weren't commuting as much. They maybe weren't spending as much alone time. And so what we've noticed over the last year is more and more people might tell me that they listen to it while mowing the lawn or on the train or doing other activities, but we've just seen our engagement continue to go up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is super. And what have you done to achieve that? How have you sort of differentiated yourself from other podcasts in this space?
Well, for us, there's not a lot of other podcasts talking about like the strategic value of the workplace for organizations. There are some that I really enjoy that are focused on design or more specific elements of how you create or manage a facility, but linking topics around workplace with strategic business outcomes, like trying to bridge that space from the C-suite to people that really care about physical workplace was something that I hadn't seen done as much. And as far as how to do it, it's really been around selecting great guests.
Mm.
We've presented a real diversity of opinions and perspectives. More recently, I and members of my team have begun spending a little bit more time unpacking what we hear from the guests and how these insights can be applied to different organizations just to help bridge any gap that might exist there. But no, it's really been around getting fantastic guests, asking them a small number of open-ended questions and letting them share what they know.
Yeah, that's a brilliant strategy, and they are really great conversations. I've really enjoyed listening in as we've been producing them. So how are you measuring the outcomes of your podcast? Have you got a kind of ROI model in place, or how are you kind of assessing that?
Great question. And we probably need to think more about this, but so far we've been tracking downloads. We've been talking a lot about how our own employees are internalizing the information. It's become a bit of an internal book club, so to speak, not just for us, but we work through independent distributors and dealerships that have also really latched onto the content. So it's become a form of training, actually, that maybe we hadn't initially expected. Anecdotally, what I love is that my team talks with hundreds of large global organizations every year, both in the course of our research, but just to answer questions that they might have about what to do with their workplace. And increasingly, it's very common for someone to say they'd like to talk with us, they're listeners of the podcast. So that's great for me because it means that they've already begun thinking about some of this stuff. They kind of know what we can offer. And I do think it's playing a role in driving some of those big organizations that have key questions back to our team to try to apply this information in new and more specific ways for them.
That's excellent, and great that you've got that side benefit of your employees treating it like a book club. That sounds amazing. So to what extent do you think it's met your expectations, this podcast?
Oh, it's exceeded my expectations. I mean, to be honest, we were just looking like in late 2020 and early 2021 for some vehicle to try to get, I guess, a little more nuanced and complex information out there. I know we live in like a TikTok world where people want 20 seconds, and we need to fulfill that too. But when it comes to complicated issues around employee well-being, engagement, real estate strategies, you just need a vehicle to be able to get deeper content out there without asking people to read white papers. Not everybody's super enthusiastic to dive into the next 20-page white paper. So podcasting as a medium has turned out to be really, really good. And I think the engagement, the types of guests we've gotten, the inbound requests for could we be on the podcast, all of that's exceeded my expectations. And you've played a big role in this too, because in our early stages, I was trying to act to some extent as the person keeping track of things, making sure the technology is working, trying to remember what to edit. So as we've grown, like having a great partner like you has made this so much easier. And our intent is just to continue to grow this as far as we can.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. And I'm so glad that we've been able to support you with that growth. So, it sounds like there have been loads of benefits from starting the podcast. Was there anything that you really weren't expecting that's, been a bonus?
Well, I thought you were going to say that I wasn't expecting. That might not have been. Well, I'll give you the good and the bad. The
Okay.
challenge that I didn't expect, although I should have seen it coming, was just scheduling, right?
Yeah.
Trying to get everyone's calendars aligned to do this sort of recording, particularly in an era where people are so back to back with meetings. We've had to be more proactive. We've had to think out farther in the future. Now, scheduling guests months out is not uncommon, which means you have to take that into account when you record the conversation, because there might be a little bit of latency there between when you initially found someone and when you actually end up talking with them. As far as unexpected positive things that maybe we weren't expecting, is just how it's deepened some of our relationships with some of our guests. I think we've always tried to provide a platform for really, really bright people to share what they know about work and workplace. We do have a webinar series. We've done different things on YouTube and online, but this is a platform of sorts. And so when we start getting really great guests, I think our new guests begin to listen to more and more about what the past guests have said. They're taking in more information. They're providing us deep, nuanced thought. And we just continue to find new ways of working with them. So there are some folks that really I didn't know that well. Maybe we'd had a little bit of interaction. I knew they were smart, knew they had good perspectives that we brought on looking forward. And then as a result of our conversation, it's just provided this major catalyst to go deeper, maybe do more research together, maybe go explore new topics together, or just stay in touch. So yeah, I guess maybe I was a little surprised at just how positive it's been relationally with some of our partners out there.
Yeah, that sounds brilliant. So it sounds like it's really helping you to, build those relationships and make them even deeper, those existing relationships. Would you say it's helped you in terms of opening new opportunities as well?
I think so. Yeah, sure. One of the things that I noticed early in kind of quarantine was that some of the executive level audiences that were interested in the future of offices and the physical workplace were people that maybe haven't been in the past. Traditionally, if you look at how an organization creates their workplace, there's a facilities and real estate team that reports to the CFO, and other functions may or may not be as involved, but primarily what we saw was human resource executives, chief HR officers, chief people officers starting to say, hang on, what's the role of our physical workplace in this new era of work? And it became quite common for me to hear that the people that we're working with on a day-to-day customer relationship were sending episodes of the podcast to members of their C-suite, including HR leadership, IT leadership, legal, that they might not normally engage with. So it just elevated this topic of future of work and workplace. And I think it allowed the people that we serve on a day-to-day basis to have more strategic conversations than the sort of like real estate planning, traditional interior design considerations, which are important. But things like, how does a physical workplace help engage a workforce that's burned out, help them to work in a more sustainable, healthy, productive way? Those conversations, unfortunately, weren't near as common as we would have liked 5 years ago, but they're more common now.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great ethic to strive for, as well as to kind of elevate the understanding of all those people who come into contact, with your content. I think that's such a great idea. And it really helps to connect lots of things that may otherwise not see the value in each other's, contribution. So yeah, that's amazing. So are there any particular highlights that stand out to you from making the podcast?
There are. I mean, there have been times when I'm in the midst as the host of asking questions that maybe I thought I knew the answer to, and then someone introduces something that I have to almost stop in the moment and think, wow, that's a bigger idea. We've had that from guests who work in functions like corporate real estate and interior design that I know a lot about. But then we've also had guests that are from adjacent domains that maybe we wouldn't normally interact with. One example would be right at the end of season 1, we had a guy by the name of John Powell, who leads the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley. And if you're familiar with what's happening in the DE&I space, belonging as a concept is, I think, becoming a higher and higher priority, in part because, unfortunately, there's a political nature in some cases to DE&I that isn't as pronounced when you simply sit with another person and say, don't we want everyone to belong? And what can we do to co-create that belonging? And so as John unpacked this concept of othering and belonging, he even talked about it as like DE&I 2.0. I was learning on the spot, and I have gone back to that episode. I've had my kids listen to that episode. They're young, they're not interested in offices, but he changed my worldview, if I'm being honest. And there were other moments like that, whether it was about our industry or our world, that just on a personal note have been so enriching. And I don't think I ever would have had the chance to have those conversations if we didn't have a medium like this.
Yeah, that's brilliant. It's incredible what a conversation can achieve, isn't it? So, final question. What advice would you offer to any other leaders who are thinking about using podcasting as a route to engage their audience?
Well, I'd say it's worth considering jumping in, but that just like any other form of communication, you should think about whether or not it's something that you're really interested in sustaining. So I remember years ago, my wife was a fairly successful blogger back when mom blogs were really big, and all sorts of people jumped into it in the same way that all sorts of people are jumping into podcasting. And in some ways, I view podcasts as the new kind of rebirth of blogging. And what people find is that it's really fun for like the first 4 or 5 episodes, but you have to think about what does a more sustained approach to this content look like. As I mentioned, I'm really fortunate because of our network. We have all of these brilliant people that we interact with in the course of our research. So because of that, I have like this never-ending stream of wonderful guests that can share new ideas. But not everybody has that. And so you need to try to figure out what it looks like to be audience-centric, make sure the content first and foremost is serving whoever you've decided is your audience, and then ask the question, is this sustainable? Is it something that we're really interested in doing beyond the first 3 or 4 months? And if the answer is yes, then I'd say just jump right in and figure it out. You know, some of our early episodes, I'm not sure I knew what I was asking. My mouth was either way too close to the mic or way too far away from it. You know, it's trial and error. But no, once you decide that this is something that if it works, you're willing to stick with, then just jump right in.
Perfect. Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for all of the other insight and information you've shared with us. It's been absolutely super and a real pleasure for me to speak with you. So thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for your partnership.